My theology is a theology of grace, and I would say a theology of lavish love. So, lavish love is a term that I learned in seminary. I wish I could remember which theologian coined it. But this notion that God is a God who lavishes love on us, pressed down, good measure, running over, or the notion that we have a cup that's full and that God just keeps pouring into that cup until it overflows. I think that is the grounding of my theology, as well as this notion of grace. I would say irresistible grace, and that comes from John Calvin, who I know a lot of people have issues with Calvin. I happen to love Calvin and think that his theology is misunderstood. So Calvin's theology of irresistible grace says that it's so good that God is always chasing after us in a way that we just cannot resist it. It's amazing, it's delicious, it's irresistible. So I think that's the grounding of my theology. And then I think the heartbreak of my understanding, my theological understanding, is that humanity can't believe it, which is how we end up crucifying Jesus. I think it was Rodney Dangerfield who said, I would never be a member of a club that would take me as a member. I think that's where Christians get in trouble. We cannot believe that God would love us so much, that Jesus is coming to earth to be with us, to move into the neighborhood. We can't believe that it's for us. And I think again and again we crucify Jesus out of a belief that we're not worthy, that God couldn't possibly be telling us the truth. I had a dear friend that I performed with. We both worked and auditioned in New York, and she moved to California after her career at Alvin Ailey. We weren't really close, but we saw each other at auditions. And when I went to seminary in California, she got in touch and said, I'd love to see you. I don't have a whole lot of friends out here. So we made a date to meet for coffee, and I got to the cafe early. I was sitting at the table, and she came just barreling, like literally, like rushing through the door. And she came over to me, and I stood up, and she took my hand, my face in her hands, like on each side of my cheeks. And she just started kissing me all over my face, my cheeks, my forehead. And this rush of questions went through my head. I thought, does she remember who I am? Does she have me mistaken for someone else? Does she remember that we didn't really know each other that well? And then she sat down, crossed her legs, and leaned forward and said, now tell me everything you've done since I've seen you. So it was just this huge rush of energy, this huge rush of welcome and hospitality and lavish love, and I couldn't believe it. She must have me mistaken for someone else. And I think that's what we do to God. So that's my understanding of theology. I love the Bible. I think it chronicles a people's story with God, the God of their understanding. I think it deserves our respect. It is the grounding of who we are as people who follow Jesus, as people who love the God that we claim. And I think the Bible is challenging, especially in these modern times. I had a New Testament professor who talked about a Japanese fish that was served as a delicacy that had to be prepared by people who were certified and specially trained. She used this metaphor to describe the Bible. She said that if you serve it up incorrectly, it's poison, like this fish. But if you serve it correctly, it is an absolute delicacy and the stuff of life. So I think because of that, the Bible both deserves our reverence and our respect, but it also has to be carefully served up, especially in these times when people use it to do all kinds of harm and to visit all sorts of evil on one another. I was raised Catholic, so a lot of my early formation around theology comes out of a Catholic understanding, I think, of who God and the Church are. I went to Catholic school from 2nd through 12th grade, and we were trained and taught to believe in what is called Jesus' preferential option for the poor. So St. Ignatius of Loyola is a theologian that I really admire and appreciate. Gustavo Gutierrez, who originated liberation theology in South America. Those are really important names for me. In seminary, I went to the Pacific School of Religion. It's on the West Coast, and so we were exposed to theologians that I'm not sure I would have been exposed to had I not been on the West Coast, close to Samoa and Tonga. So I had a lot of classmates and interacted with people from parts of the world that I'm not sure I would have been had I stayed on the East Coast. People like Kwok Pwilan, I really appreciated her theology and what she said about a two-way street of learning, that the pastor or the teacher doesn't bring all the information, that everyone in the room gathered in that space has something to share. I really found that transformative for what I bring and offer in a community of faith. Katie Geneva Cannon, first woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, which is my current denomination. I heard her speak, I believe, right over here at Union Theological Seminary, and she has many and much wisdom to share with us. But what stuck out for me in that particular talk was her reminder that we want to live to serve another day. She encountered a lot of cuts and bruises in academia and in the church, being the first in a lot of places. And so this notion that we need to rest, that we need to care for ourselves so that we can live to serve another day was very transformative for me. Howard Thurman, who influenced the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and whose church I had the honor of dancing in twice when I was in seminary. He's a mystic. He had if I understand correctly, the first interracial church in the country, I believe in the late 1940s. So to dance in that space and to read the writings of a fellow mystic, Howard Thurman is an amazing human being. And the way that he was able to see beyond division and borders certainly had an influence on me as well. And then I probably would wrap up with Nicholas Wolterstorff, who's probably not super well known, but wrote a book called Lament for a Son. His son died young, and as someone who's very interested in pastoral care and healing, to read from a theologian about where God is in the great tragedies of our life was very formative for me. I go back to that book often. And I'll conclude with William Plaker, who wrote, I think the title of the book is Conversations with a Vulnerable God. But this notion that God is vulnerable and that God, out of God's great vulnerability, loves us and cares for us is inspiring for me in terms of wanting to be vulnerable and in relationship with God's people.